Hello everyone, welcome to Ivy's YouTube channel. My name is Eeshani and I'm one of the trainers at Ivy for Excel, for automation of Excel through VBA and the data visualization tools of Power BI and Tableau. So today we're going to talk about a very interesting function that exists in Office 365 called Lambda. Now, being a person who knows VBA, I get requests for creating new functions of Excel based on the requirement of the business, based on the requirement of the company. Now, coding, as everybody knows, is not fun. Coding, people don't find it easy to understand. So I was very glad to come across this function called Lambda. Now, what Lambda can do for us in Excel is it can help us to create some custom calculations which we were typically doing using VBA. We can reuse these functions across them. So no need of VBA for creating functions anymore since we have Lambda. So we can do custom calculation, we can write functions that can do text processing. Recently, I had one of the instances where I had put about two substitutes, multiple ifs, left and mid function to get the output of the text. Then we can also apply it for data validation. We can do some complex array operations. We can put one lambda function inside another, and we can also come with recursive lambda, which is like looping in VBA. So let's get started. In today's video, we will talk about few use cases and there will be a follow-up video where we'll talk about a little more complex scenarios like recursive lambda or nesting one lambda inside another. So let me take the first example. Over here, let's say I want to create a function that calculates a weighted average for me. So typically, weighted average would be something like a sum product divided by the sum. So over here, I have got a list of students, I've got their course grades, and I've got the credits that they have. Now, where the weighted average will come from, this is going to be the value, and the credits would be considered as the weight. So rather than working with some product in which I could have some, I would pick this, comma, then I have to pick this, then divide by the sum function once again by the credit. I can create a function called weighted average and then use it like any other function of Excel. So let's get started how to do it. So like I said, this work of creating custom functions inside Excel without a VBA code can be done by this Lambda function. Now in Lambda, what are the requirements? You have to either give a parameter meaning the input that you need to pass to the function in order for it to give you an output, followed by the calculations. So in order to understand this better, what will go as a parameter, what goes as a calculation, it's always a good idea to do the function first as if you were doing it in Excel and then converting it into a Lambda function. So like I said, if I had to work on this weighted average, I would have picked the two range, one for course, one for credit, and then put a divide by sum function and select the credits, right? So how many inputs do I need? Essentially, I'm using two inputs. One is the value, one is the weight. So in Lambda function, the very first thing you have to give is the parameters. So let's say in parameter, I'm giving value, right? And I'm going to give the weight, which I'll put WT. So think about this text that I'm putting over here as value, comma, WT as variables. So again, this concept is very alien to Excel that we have variables. We don't have variables in Excel since we refer to the Excel cells and retrieve the value. So value and WT are variables. And now what I'm going to do is write this calculation over here. So now if I have to write a sum product function, my array 1 would be value. So now you see it is coming as a variable, which I can use. Array 2 is going to be weight. And once I've got these two, I want to divide it by the sum of weight. So these variables name could be anything. Once this entire thing is complete, I'm going to close the Lambda function and press enter. Now, when I do that, we see that we got a calculation error. Why? Because there's no input, there's no reference that has been given to this function to do the calculation for us. Now, even before we create it as a function of Excel, we would like to do a quick check whether it's working correctly or not. And in order to do that, all you have to do is after the Lambda function in the in the circular bracket, give the values. So I need to give two values, the value and the weight. And so I'm going to select the course grade, comma, I'm going to select the credits, close the bracket. Now when I press enter, it is giving me exactly the same value that I had on the top. Now that we know it's working properly, I can delete this part. And now in order to convert this Lambda into a function of Excel, I'm going to select the entire Lambda function, copy it, go to my name manager. On the top, we can create a new name. Let's call it weighted average. And over here, I'm going to replace with the Lambda function. Once we click OK, it has created a new function called WT average. And when I press equal to WT, it comes up in my list as a function. It's got an fx in front. Now, like any other function, what you need to do is give the value, put the weight. So this is the value, comma, this is the weight, and press enter. It does the rest of it by itself. So this was a case, a very simplistic case to start off with what Lambda functions are all about. Like we saw, we had two functions, sum product and sum, giving us the output. Rather than that, we created a function in which we are giving exactly the same number of inputs and getting the calculated field. Now let's take another use case. I want to create a function in which I want to count the number of records where the profit percentage is greater than a target value. Let's say 20 is my target. So I want to find out how many car sales happened where I achieved a profit percentage of more than 20%. Now, typically, in order to do this work, we would kind of create a column of profit, percentage, and then figure out by auto filters what is the value. But over here, I've already created this function called count of profit target. And all I'm doing is giving the columns based on which the calculation would be done, like how the profit is getting calculated, and then giving my target. So internally, this function, what it is doing is it's calculating a profit percentage for each record, and wherever the record is meeting with the target greater than equal to the target, it is doing a counting of it. So how would we do this function? So like I said, before we jump into Lambda function, very important to understand what all we need. So in this scenario, to find a profit percentage, like I would if I had to do it by hand, I would have done your sales minus the cost divided by the cost and copy paste. Let's say we convert it into a percentage. And then I would match up whichever is greater than. So I can add a filter. And then I would do greater than equal to, let's say 20%. Then I'm getting a value of 278, right? But this was too much work. I had to calculate a column, increase the sheet size for no reason, apply filters, or use some conditional functions to get this value. So rather than doing all these activities of adding up, what we are going to do is write or create a Lambda function. So now, how will I find the profit percentage? I will find the profit percentage by finding sales minus the cost and dividing it by cost. This is the percentage. I would want to put a check on it that if this is greater than the target, then I want to count it. So this work can be done by sum product. So if I use a sum product, and I'm going to put two negative signs and explain you what that is all about. In the array, I'm going to put the sales. In the second array, I'm going to put the this minus the second array, right? Close the bracket, divided by cost, close the bracket, and close the bracket, and we press enter. We are getting 249. Okay. Now, what we want to do over here is this is giving you like the total, but over here we want to put some condition, right? So I want to do a sum product when it is greater than equal to, let's say, 20%. So it's giving me, it's not giving me anything over here. The brackets might be an issue. Hold on. So basically what a sum product is doing over here, it's giving you a value of true or false, right? And since it's working on an array, it will have a bunch of true and false. Now, what these two negative signs are for? Typically, sum product works with, it returns you a number, but when you put a greater than sign, less than sign, like a logical test, what it will do is for a value of true, it returns a -1, and for a value of false, it returns a 0. Now, whenever the condition is true, that's the time I would want it to be counted, but I don't want a negative number. So the first negative sign converts this true or false to 1 and 0. And the second negative sign that we are going to put is going to turn this -1 into a +1 for our work. So let's try to use the lambda function once again. Parameter, how many parameters I need? I need two parameters. Once I'm going to call sales. Second one, I'm going to call the cost. Actually, I've already created one. So let me just do this thing. I am going to go ahead and delete it. Close it. Okay, so equal to lambda. I want sales, comma, I want cost. Remember, the first thing is the parameters, the input which you are going to give to your function. And I want target. So these three becomes my variables. Once this is done, now I have to put my calculations in. So sum product and two negation signs. And now it is going to be sales minus the cost, close bracket, divide by cost. If this thing is greater than equal to the target, then I want to count it. So I close the bracket for sales, close the bracket for sum product, close the bracket for lambda, and we got a calculation error. So again, the reason I'm getting a calculation error is there is no input. So in order to give the input, I need three inputs to be given. So at the very end, to check whether the function is working, let's select the sales column, comma. Let's go ahead and select the cost, comma, and I'm going to select the target over here, close the bracket, enter, and I get 278. That's exactly the same number we got with 20%. Now, once this is ready, I'm going to delete the variables past, select only my lambda function, copy it, go to the formula, name manager, create new. This is going to be count target, profit target. And we're going to go ahead and paste it over here. Now it is good to be used in Excel in this particular workbook. So I'm going to delete this, delete the workings. This is my target. I want the count. And we go as count profit targets. I need to give sales, comma, I need to give cost, comma, I need to give the target. I press enter, I get 278. If I change it to 40%, I get 180. If I make it 90% profit, I get 3. So we have created a function which can get input from the Excel cell and then work with it. Now let's look at one last example for today. And that is that, let's say if I want to create a function which can add only the positive values in the range. So I want to do a sum when the number is greater than 0. So again, I had created this function to illustrate. So this function is called sum positive. All it requires is a range. So when I give a range to it, I press enter. It's giving 220, 2120. Let's quickly check. Filter greater than 0. And if I do a sum on it, it is coming out to be 2120. Exactly what the function is written. So I don't have to filter my negative numbers anymore. So once again, let's create it. So now in order to create this thing, there's only one input that is required. So we are going to use Lambda. Input required is range, comma. Now what is the calculation? So I want to do a sum based on a condition. What is the condition? That if my range is greater than 0, means it's a positive number, then I want the range value. Otherwise, I want the 0 to be added. So finishing if function, finishing sum function, finishing the lambda function, and let's also go ahead and give a sample set to it. Once I do this, press enter, the value has come. Means it is going to work. So all we did over here, we kind of made it go through each and every value in a range, and for each one, it checked whether it's greater than 0. If yes, we pick the value. And once we have these array of values, then we are doing a sum function on it. So one last step, we are going to copy it and go to formula, name manager, let's say new, this is sum positive, and we're going to go ahead and select paste our lambda function and click OK. Once they are created, all I have to do is use it just like any other function. So sum, I've got positive, all I have to give is a range and it works. And in future, I'm changing anything from positive to negative, this number automatically updates. So these are the 3 use cases. Next week, we'll try to look at the nested lambdas and the recursive lambda, what could be the use case that we want. Now, one thing that kind of disappointed that typically what happens when you create a function in VBA, you can make it an add-in of Excel and use it across all the workbooks in your system. It doesn't go to some other person's system, but at least in your system, it's not restricted to a workbook. Unfortunately, if I create a new workbook, and let's say if I had a very similar work to be done of adding the positive values over here, then if I try to use this sum positive, it does not exist. It is a function that is created for a specific workbook. So one way of dealing with this is create templates of your lambdas. And whenever you want to do a very similar thing where this calculation is required, use that workbook for the calculation. So that's one of the disadvantages I feel coming from VBA to Lambda functions. I really can't make it work across workbooks. So I hope you enjoyed this video. For more such videos, please make sure you subscribe. And next week, I'll meet you again and we'll work with the nested lambdas and recursive lambda. If there is any function that you would like to convert into a lambda and make it useful for your work, do drop it in the comment and I'll try to create a lambda function for it and post it in the reply. Thank you.